Hello everyone again. Last time in the earlier module, as we talked about different skills for developing the research that you are doing for your master's thesis as well as for your PhD. The integral part of your research is going to be your thesis, and I'm sure all of you know that because it's the most important way that how you are going to deliver the message or the research work you've been doing for last 3-4 years, or you've been doing it during your master's work maybe for 9 months or for 12 months research project. So the thesis is very integral part of your research, as I said, and how you can write it effectively. So I'm going to give you some tips, the tactics that might help you during this session and that will help you to implement while you are doing your research work. So this workshop or this session is going to be very helpful. That's what I believe for all research master students as well as for the PhD student. So let's begin. So there are two news in this part, like there is a good news, there is a bad news. Okay, so when you talk about the good news while doing your research, is going to be yes, I'm going to receive a doctorate degree. Okay, so that's your aim, that's what you are imagining at the end of your research work. So you are going to be titled as a doctor, so it's been rewarded, your work is going to get rewarded with the thesis. However, to get or to go to that good news, there is always a bad news that you have to write a thesis, which is a very hard and a painful job. So you have already done the fun part, as I also explained in the earlier module, that the fun part is always doing a research, but when it comes to a writing part, then it gets bit a tricky one. All right, so that's why writing a thesis is a very tedious job that many of the research students they experience, and that's why it's important that to make it this bad news as well as a good news, it's efforts. You need to go with a lot of efforts to make sure that the message that you are going to deliver in the form of your thesis is very strong. So let's move on the different or the bigger picture that you are going to generate and which is in the form of your thesis. Okay. So why you write thesis? Why it's necessary? Because it's considered as a Bible of your work. It's considered of a useful contribution to the knowledge that you have gathered during your research work. All right. So your thesis describes your plan of research, that what you have done, why the work you have done, how you have done it, and why it was necessary, or where you have conducted that part of the job. So all these aspects comes into your thesis, but in much more explanatory form. Okay, so what you intend to study, the scope, aims, the questions that you are going to address, how you have done it, which can be said as a methodology, or in the science field it's materials and the methods. Why this topic needs to be studied? So what is the significance? Why only you are going to do this job? Why none of others has done it? Okay, so it's the significance of your study, and another one is where you will conduct this work. So all these questions been addressed into your Bible, which is called the thesis, in a quite descriptive form. Everyone thinks when they start their research project that what is the ideal time that I should start writing a thesis. So if you ask me this question, I would say there is no ideal time than starting writing your thesis from the day one of your research. Okay, because when you decided doing your research, I know everyone is excited. Yes, I'm being applied for the PhD. I got the candidature to do my PhD work for my research work, and that's why at that phase of your research you are very well motivated. So it's a very ideal time when you are motivated, you start writing your thesis. Okay, so that's why I would say start writing your thesis from the day one of your research work. Never procrastinate, like I will do it a month later when I start my work, or I will start writing when I'm in the past 6 months of my candidature, or maybe I will start writing just before 6 months of completing my candidature. Okay, so I would suggest the day one, when you are motivated, when you are focused, that's the best time that you should start writing. Okay, how do you start? Because when you actually start working on the research, I'm sure you might have done a lot of background study, and we call it as a literature of the review. Okay, so you know what knowledge is available in your field of expertise of your research and what is lacking. So you have collected the whole data, and that data you already have it to initiate your writing. Okay, so how you can start doesn't matter. You can start with writing one sentence per day, writing one paragraph, one page. It's just the beginning, and you build up on that beginning. Okay, so write early, write often, and writing is the thinking, is the message that I would like to give when you start asking, how do I start? Okay, so once you have started, what's next? Okay, so the thesis has different components. That's what I'm going to talk about as well in later as we move on into this discussion. So the thesis, it has different components like table of contents, it has the acknowledgement, it has list of tables and figures, summary, introduction, materials and methods, results, discussion, conclusion, and blah blah blah. Okay, so start with the easiest part of the thesis category. So for example, you can start with the writing a table of the contents. Okay, then it should be the logical structure of your thesis, like how it's going to be formatted. So I just say table of contents, then it's followed by your list of figures, box list of figures, tables, acknowledgement, abstract, and so on. So if we talk about a design of the thesis structure, the first part that it comes is the title page. Okay, so that basically explains what is the title of your research, where you have conducted your research, that is the name of the institute, the department, and in which year you have submitted your thesis, which then once you go inside is followed by the table of contents, list of tables, figures, declaration, acknowledgement, abstract, list of abbreviation. Okay, so these are the minor parts and these are the easiest parts. So I would suggest you start writing your thesis from this small or the minor parts. Though it's minor, remember it takes a lot of time. So don't think it's minor, I can do it at the last moment. Please do not be under this wrong impression. The main structure of the thesis, what it comprises is your introduction, then followed by materials and methods, then results, discussion, conclusion, references, and then appendices. Okay, so we will be talking about each of this section in detail as we move on. Refer a thesis in your library. As I said, there is a lot of data resources is available. So you can go to your library, you can go online, you can find a good template of the thesis to design a good structure for your own thesis. Okay, so the first part, how should be your thesis title, as I said. Okay, and it's a very misunderstanding for your PhD thesis that the more complicated is your title, it means you have done really a better job, but that's not right. Okay, so it's a misunderstanding. So I would suggest that your thesis title should be crisp and clear. It should understand or it should deliver the message in a very simple format. Okay, so condensing over half a decade of your lifetime is going to be in one sentence, and that's to represent your title. I know it's difficult, but that's your task. It's going to be your skill to make your title catchy, to make your title look very attractive and exciting. It should be consistent with the length, okay, the number of the words that you use in or for. Even the obscure topic few people care about, you need to be care of for it. Okay, so that's how your thesis title is going to be. Okay, so after the thesis title comes your abstract or the summary. So again, the abstract or the summary is the condensation, or it's basically a synopsis of the work that you've been doing for 4-5 years, or whatever work you have done. You have to summarize it into a one page. So again, it's a very tedious task, and it's always recommended that you write your abstract or the summary at the end of your thesis. Okay. So this abstract, what should go in your abstract? It should be maximum 350 words, okay? Maximum one page that comprises of 350 words, and it should give the overview of your research work. So when I talk about the overview, how it should start. So your abstract should start with the background work, for example. So what earlier studies has been done, followed by what are the loopholes or what are the lacunae that your research is facing. And this is the lacunae my research work is facing, and that's why we build up on the new aims and the objectives which will address these loopholes or which will fill the gaps in the knowledge. So once you have addressed your aims and objectives, then you have to write the results or the work or the style or the methodology that you implemented to address this solution. So results and the discussion will follow later on, just in 1 or 2 sentences, and the end of your abstract or the summary or it should conclude in a positive way or in the prospect of the future study. Okay, so that's how your abstract basically comprises. So as I said, summarize important elements. Start with the intro, statement of the problem, background, research questions, hypothesis, materials and methods that you use, and the last concluding part should be the future scope. As I said, it's recommended to write an abstract at the end because you have done the whole work, you have got the whole data. So when you are writing an abstract, it will give you an overall analysis of your work. And in many cases, when your thesis goes for assessment to external supervisors or to the externals, the first thing that they do is read your summary or read your abstract to understand what work you have done. And if they find your abstract and summary very interesting, it's the best impression you can have. So like when we say the first impression is the best impression or the last impression. So that's how summary basically gives you the first impression. So if your summary and the abstract is well written, is very written in a way which generates the excitement for the reader or for your external assessor to go through it, will give you an interest or will give the reader the interest, and that's why it's recommended to write your thesis abstract at the end. Beware, never write references in your abstract. So many abstract I have gone through, they basically have references, which is a strict no-no when you are writing it. Again, a strict no-no for any abbreviations. If you are using any abbreviation, you need to expand those abbreviations, okay? Because it's the first time your reader is going to read it. So it should need to be very clear what does your research work mean. So do not use any abbreviation, do not use any references, or do not use the work that is really not necessary to be put into your abstract. Alright, then the next important part or the section of your thesis is called as the introduction. So when you are writing introduction, is basically you are establishing a general territory or a real work scenario that has already been done in the area of your work. So the literature review that you have done earlier comes here. Okay, so you can read the things that are the papers or the articles or any database material that you have read. You need to compile it in such a way that it will give the reader the background study of your work. You also need to describe the broad foundations of your study, so like a basic sufficient background for the reader. You need to also describe the general scope, why you want to do this work, okay? So what are the gaps in the knowledge, and that's how you are going to keep the reader engaged. So that's the main purpose to write an introduction. You can use minimum 15 to 20 references while drafting the introduction in this section. If you are writing a PhD thesis, this number of references could increase. Okay, so when you are writing your intro, you also need to address the statement of the problem. So, as I said, why you are doing your work. Okay, so answer the question, what is the gap in the knowledge that needs to be filled, or what is the problem that needs to be solved. So your aims and objectives in a simple statement you need to address in this section. Okay, so state the problem in early paragraphs, give the gaps, and then consider framing a problem as a question to which you are going to deliver the solution. So aims and objectives, so explain the goals and the research objectives of the study. Okay, show the original contribution of your study, that if you have done any preliminary work in regard with your study, then you need to show the original contribution of your study. Again, then you can provide a more detailed account of the points that are summarized into the introduction, and then finally conclude the rationale of your study. Okay, so the importance, or I would say the significance. While writing aims and objectives, we always address what we are going to do. We are going to do this, we are going to do that, but keep in mind it's also important and to be very clear that your study will not address some of the work as well. Okay, so the points that you won't be looking at needs to be mentioned here as well. It's not only about I will be doing this, I will be doing that. It should also be focused on that this study will not look into this matter. We are completely focused on this agenda and not the agenda B. So you can also mention these things or address these issues into your aims and objectives. So now the review of literature, as I said, it's a very important part of your research, because that's basically going to give the understanding to you that what type of research has been done earlier, what are the gaps, and how you need to take it further to fill those gaps. So how your research is going to be proving to be a novel. So that's why it's very important for the reader to understand. So review of literature always takes longer time in your initial phases of your research, and I would say giving around 3 to 6 months of the time to go through your different review of literature is the ideal time to do. So how we can say I have collected enough material or enough database so that I can move on to the next phase of my research. Okay, so there are some criteria that will decide whether you have done your effective review of literature or not. The one is flesh out the background of your study, as I said. Critically assess the important research. So while doing your literature of review, you also come across some expertise in your field. Okay, you might be reading their papers, so you come across these group of the expertise which are working on a particular work which might be similar to yours. Okay, so you need to jot down these expertise as well, and in future if you want to contact them, or if you want to get any suggestions or any help in regard with your research, you can definitely communicate with them. The another criteria is identify the potential gaps in the knowledge. All right, then establish a need for a current or any future research projects, that once you have done your work in the given period of time frame, like 3 to 4 years, there is still going to be unfinished tasks. Okay, so that lays down the future aspect or the future prospect of your work. So how you are going to take care of it, it should also be considered effectively in your review of literature. So there are few tips I am going to talk about here that will give you the idea to draft a good review of literature. And the first tip is to categorize the literature into a recognizable topic clusters. So for example, if you are going through literature review and you find that this paper is very good for discussion part or for the conclusion part or for the methodology, so you can categorize them based upon these aspects. You can take out the various positions that are relevant to your project, and you can make a file where you can basically categorize all your papers based upon these aspects. The another way is you can demonstrate the places where the literature is lacking. Okay, so for example, we can always look for a particular group of the researchers who are working on a particular project or the particular concept. So you can categorize them based upon the idea or based upon the work that they have been doing. One of the easiest way to effectively manage your review of literature that I had followed during my research work is that you can have a file and you can label them alphabetically based upon the authors, okay, from A to Z, and then based upon these authors you can always go back to the work that they have done. So that will give you an understanding how to maintain your review of literature. Now there are few more tips as well while you are drafting your methodology section. Okay, so now we talked about the intro. The majority of the part that your introduction is going to focus is on the review of literature or the background study that I talked, the gaps and the aims and objectives of your study. But while you are doing a methodology section, it's basically a pattern where you are describing the ways the materials and the methods through which you have done your work. Okay, now this part can vary based upon your background. So if you are in physical science, social sciences, humanities, so it can vary based upon your faculty or based upon your stream. So it's better you follow the stream that you are referring to. Also important to remember that your method section may also require the supporting literature. For example, the method which you have been used from someone else, but you have still modified it. It's always important, it's necessary that you cite those literature while you are referring to those methodology. So anticipate and preempt the audience methodological concerns. So acknowledge the major problems, justify your approach by showing how benefits outweighs the potential problems. Okay, so referencing could also be involved into this section. So methodology should be very clear and in detail to be able to repeat it by others. That's the main purpose that why you've been asked to write a materials and the methodology section, that the person sitting at any corner of the world after reading your paper should be able to replicate the same work by going through your methodology section. So here is one of the example that how you can write your methodology section. For example, you are writing an analytical procedure. Okay, how you have done it. Now here it says that the groundwater samples were analyzed by using a gas chromatography. Now it's important that you explain that which specific columns were used. Okay, which company it was used. So for example, here it says the Agilent Tech Australia. Then it needs to be followed by the program, that how did you run it, for how long, with how many amount of the gases. Okay, so all these details has to go in your methodology section. So if anyone else wants to repeat it, they should be able to do so. In writing a methodology section, it's very important to use the past tense. Alright, the passive voice in a drafting of the methodology section. So never say like I did this, we did that, our group did this. It should be always addressed in a passive voice. For example, the groundwater samples were collected, analyzed, these analyses were done. Never use I did this analyze, we did this analyze. So it's very important thing to remember while writing your methodology. This is another example again where it shows that, for example, this is a microbial profiling section, okay, where the researchers has done a lot of different molecular tools to analyze the microbial community. So here again you need to explain the types of the instruments that you have used, where they are available, and again if it's important you can also use the the wavelengths that has been accessed. Again, you can see there are some references has also been given. For example, you can see like the described by Patil and et al. So if you don't want to mention the complete protocol which has already been followed by someone else, you can just say that the similar method has been implemented described by the name of the authors. Alright, so when you are writing the figures or putting the figures as well as the tables, there are also some important criteria that you need to remember. This is just one of the example I have shown over here, that how you need to label your images or the figures, which should also be followed by a caption. Okay, so the figure 2.1, which indicates an anaerobic chamber or the glove box used in this study. So even your caption should be self-explanatory. So by just reading your figure caption, the reader should be able to understand what exactly it is. So it's very important to label your figures or the schematics appropriately. Okay, so now we talked about abstract, we talked about introduction followed by materials and methods. Now the important part that comes in is your result and discussion, which is the most tedious part, because you are spending a lot of time to get optimal results. Okay, so you have spent a lot of you are invested so much time to get this section of your thesis. So as you have spent so much time, it deserves a lot of attention. In many cases, the results and discussion could be combined together or they could be separated. But the best way for your writing your thesis is that you separate your results and the discussion section. However, when you are writing a manuscript or the research article, many times the results and discussion sections are combined. Here we will talk like separated aspects, like results is separate than the discussion. So when you are writing, is basically the outcomes of your study. So there should be a lot of figures, tables, graphs, Excel sheets, and any other form in which you have represented your results. So all these things comes under this section. References are generally not mentioned here because it's your work. So you are not referring to someone else. Okay, so the references doesn't come under this. Results and discussion section, they generally comprises a large part of your thesis, and I would say around 60% of your thesis writing goes into this section, and not only the writing but as well as your research work. So that's why it's very important that you plan your time wisely to write these sections very properly or in a very precise manner. When we are talking about discussion, basically you are trying to justify your results, that why you have got these results, why you think that the results are good or bad. Also important thing to remember is that there are no results that are good or bad. Whatever you have got, you have to mention it. And that's why discussion section is there to justify your work. Alright. Discussion, I would say, is again the most trickiest part to write, and that's why again dedicate enough amount of time to write this section. So in this category, what goes is basically it provides a scientific explanation of your work or of your results. This section discusses or compares your work with someone else. Okay, so there are many groups of researchers who might have worked in a similar issue. So you can explain or you can compare their work with yours, that how it's relevant or how it's same or how it's different. Okay, it also provides the strong justification of the success or the failure of your experimental plan. But as I say, there is no positive or negative results in your research. Whatever results you have got, it has to be justified. So this section is the majority or the recent or the current references. As I said, in the result section, you are not required to provide the references because it's your own data. But that's not the case. It's completely opposite in your discussion section. And now your literature of review is going to help you to write your discussion material. Okay, but in many of the cases, you need a very latest or the recent references to cite into this section. Now this is again one of the examples that how you should represent your result section. For example, this is a graph over here, okay, which indicates the sequential dechlorination pattern of a contaminant which is called as a tetrachloroethane, which is found in the groundwater. Now if you look at this graph, what it shows, it has x-axis, it has got the y-axis, all right. It also shows the different legends in these cases. It shows that the study has been conducted from April to November 2013. So it gives you the analysis, or it gives the time frame for how long this study was done. It also says it's a dechlorination of the contaminant TC which was found in the groundwater. Alright, so it basically gives you an idea that how the dechlorination pattern is. So, how the one compound or the contaminant has been remediated over the certain period of the time. So, this caption is again very self-explanatory. Okay, just by looking into this figure, you understand what it's trying to say. So that's why your importance, or that's why your skill lies, that how you are going to explain your result. Okay, so now the conclusion, which is the final part of your thesis, followed by the discussion. As I said earlier, that many of the readers will assess your thesis just by reading your abstract. The similar criteria is applied for the conclusion part as well. Many of the assessors or external assessors or the readers, what they will do is, once they receive your thesis for the marking or for the checking, they will first read your abstract and then they will read your conclusion. They won't read anything in between, they will just skip it. And if they find the conclusion and the abstract flowing in a very well manner, written very effectively, then you are most likely or most probably likely to succeed or impress, or you can say you have succeeded in your research work. Okay, so the conclusion is generally written into 3 sections, the similar format as the abstract. So in conclusion, you can say a short concise statement of your work, like why you did it. Okay, you can explain the result in a very brief manner, all right, and how your results are contributory or significant. Okay, so the summary of the contribution you are trying to write over here, and the last part or the last section or the concluding sentence of your conclusion part would be the future prospect, like this amount of work you have done, but how there is still unfinished work which can be taken care of in the future. So that's why the future scope is also very important. The conclusion again should not use any references, okay, and the conclusion should not be a repetitive mode of your results or the abstract. So the conclusion must not be the repetition of the result, as well as it shouldn't be a reference. So that's you need to be considered when you are writing your conclusion section. It needs to be very strong, precise, clear. All right. The last part or another important part of your thesis is your references. Okay, so the number of literature that you have gone becomes your references. So there are different styles, there are different patterns that you manage your references or you write your references into your thesis. So in this section we will talk about what are different ways that you can manage your references, which is a very tedious task, and also the different styles. Okay. So why references are necessary? The first thing is that because, as I said, you are going to refer to someone else's work, and it's always a good idea to give an importance or to acknowledge that person who has helped you to build up your research, okay, and that's why it's important that you cite those references into your thesis to acknowledge someone else's work that has helped you to do yours. Examiners usually check out this section early on or will form a preliminary assessment notions early. So you need to be very attentive in this case. References must not appear in the main body because it comes at the end. So, this pattern or the style of the referencing can vary based upon your institute. If you are working in universities, institute, they might have their own set of the structure or the format that you need to follow for citing your references. The majority of the references, they come from the journal articles. So, here are the ways that you can see that how it's been written. Okay. So, for example, if you look at the first references, it starts with the name of the authors, followed by the year in which they have worked. Then the year is followed by the title of their work or the title of their research, then in which journal it has been published. For example, this paper has been published in Nature, okay, in the issue 408, and its information is on this page number. So, page numbers is the last thing that you are supposed to write. So, these are the different ways. The another thing is to manage your references is basically there are some managing references. For example, is the EndNote, Mendeley reference manager, etc. But the EndNote, the reference manager, they are paid. So, EndNote is paid. However, the reference manager is free. So, you can download these database managers and you can accordingly manage your references into your EndNote or the reference manager. So, how does these help? For example, if you have found a research article on a web page, there will be a tab called as the export citation. You have to just click on that tab which says export citation, and then that citation or that paper will be added into your EndNote or in your reference manager. And whenever you are writing or whenever you are supposed to cite a reference, you just add the name of the author. For example, here if you look at the first one, which is Adrian, it automatically at the end of your Word file, it creates that whole reference in the pattern which you are supposed to do it. So, it basically reduces your hard work, it makes your life much more easy by managing your references. Okay, now there are different ways that you get the information from. So, you are getting the information from the web pages, you are getting the information from the reference articles, from the news channels, from the radios and so on. But if you are going to cite a reference from the web page, there is a different way to cite it. How you are going to do it is basically that's how. So, for example, if you are citing a web reference, then it should be written as the institute or the organization, okay, which has the website belonging to. Then it should be followed by the title of their work, and the important thing is you need to write the web link. You can write a web link and you have to mention the date or the time when you have accessed it. So, as the first one, you can see over here, this is registry, the web link has been given and access on 23rd of February 2011, so on. So, that is how is the way of writing the references if you have got it from the web. Now, if you are citing a references that are been from the book chapters, okay, from a book, so there is again a different pattern that how you can do it. So, for example, just look at the first one. So, it first starts with the name of the authors as well as the year. So, like it says 2010. Then the name of the chapter. Okay. So, the first comes here groundwater sampling for nucleic acid biomarker analysis is the name of the chapter that you have referenced in the handbook of hydrocarbon and the lipid microbiology. So, the chapter in which book, then it should be followed by the edition or the publisher, and as well as the end it comes is your page number. So, that is how the book references are referenced. So, so far you could have understood that the referencing style or the pattern is different if you are getting references from the journal articles, from internet or from the books. Again, if you are getting a reference from a thesis, this is the way that how you do it. So, the first thing comes is the name of the person to whom the thesis belong to. So you have to write the thesis, the year in which it has been done, the name of the thesis, all right, and where the candidate has done his thesis, the work from. So it says like Department of Chemical Engineering and the Applied Chemistry from the University of the Toronto. So that's how you are supposed to cite references from a thesis. Now citing references in text. So this is just how the way, okay, we talked about the referencing. But when you are writing in the text form, there are ways again if you are citing references for more than two authors. If there are two or more than authors are involved, then how you write the reference is basically couples followed by et al. And the year in which the work has been published, like 2003. If there are more, only two authors are involved, for example in this case, okay, where you can see like Dr. and the Lovely. So you have to just say like Bond and Lovely 2003, so year in which it was published. So again these are the ways you have to cite the work if you are writing it for more than two authors or for the two authors. If there is only one author involved, then it's easy. You have to just write the name of that person, like couples, comma 2003. All right. So that's how it should be written. Now, in many cases, what happens is the same group of the authors has published paper in a same year. Okay. So in that cases, how we can write that? The name of the author, et al., and the year in which the work has been published, and you can write it as a 2009A or 2009B. So it shows that the similar group of the researchers, for example Alenta et al., they have published two papers in 2009, which is A and B. So these are the ways how you reference it. All right, so we have talked about references. Now what are appendices? Okay, so when we say about the appendices, is basically is the last part of your thesis component, but it comprises of the materials which is basically very vast. Okay, it's vast, but it's not that important to incorporate in your main body of your thesis, but it equally important that the reader should understand that how you have done this work. So appendices basically includes the large Excel sheets, the mathematical proofs, the program listing, the protocols, huge tables. So all this sort of supplementary data you can put into the appendices section, which is forms the last component of your thesis. Now the figures and tables, as I said, how it should be labeled, how it should be marked, but again I am going to focus on this, like you need to name the figures like figure 1, figure 2, figure 3 likewise. So there are ways that how you can write it, as mentioned or highlighted in this red is right. You can write in different forms like figure in a full lecture 1, fig dot 1, table 1 with the footnote, and it should be followed with the caption. And as I said in the earlier methodology part, that your caption needs to be self-explanatory, so it should allow the reader to understand what your table or the figures are talking about. In some cases the table needs to be cited, so you can say the sources, or you can use the source and from where you have gathered that information. So number your figures and tables appropriately. Make sure your figures and the table numbers been cited in your text as well, and provide a brief caption to the figures as well as the tables. So this is again another example here I would like to show you, which is basically a figure 2.3. Here you can say what it is. It's a fluorescent photomicrograph showing the presence and viability of the cells, okay, which are grown on a PC contaminated groundwater. So you can see there is a highlighted text as well as there are unhighlighted text. So definitely the highlighted text shows that it's much more important, but the unhighlighted text, it also gives you the additional data. For example, the live bacterial cells are stained by cytonine, however the dead are cited by the PR. So, the green are the live ones and red are the dead ones. It also gives the information of the size, like 5 micron is the size, so scale bar. So, just by looking at this figure and reading the caption, you understand what the figure is telling us. Another example for the table, as you can see the name of the table or the title of the table as well as the number. So, table 1.2 followed by the economics of the remediation. It has talked about the methods. Okay. So, at the end you have gathered this information from Terry. Alright. So, they have given us the source from where this information of this presented in the table has been gathered. So, that is how your table should look like. Now, there are few nuts and bolts as well of your thesis, like the things which are considered to be minor but are equally important. Okay. So, as I said, the length, how long your thesis should be, the style of your writing, like font size, what is going to be your size of your font as well as the font, the Times New Roman, Cambria, whether you are going to use active voice, passive voice. As we said, in materials and methods you are supposed to use the passive voice. So, all these are the nuts and the bolts that also give a more finishing touch to your thesis. So, always be consistent of the structure of the style that you have started using from the beginning till the end. Do not keep changing it in every section. So, that is how it will give the consistency to your thesis. Now, common mistakes. What are the common mistakes made? As I said, the complex sentences full of long words with the grammatical errors. So, it is a misunderstanding, as I said earlier while writing your title as well. It is a misunderstanding that the more complex the sentences, it is going to be more interesting, but that is not the case. It needs to be written very in a clear and a crisp and a precise form. So, avoid writing in a complex words as well as avoid any grammatical errors. A thesis should be a simple and a convincing argument. Writing too much is not going to help you. And just to give you an example is the Nash PhD. If you have heard of Dr. John Nash, who has won the Nobel Prize for writing just a 27 pages thesis. Alright. So, it says that writing too much is not necessary, but whatever you are writing, it needs to be effective. How long does it take? Okay, so it is a piece of string. Writing up is one of the major activities of doing your research. Okay, so the organization of your ideas is a big task, but once you organize it, it will flow into a way that will help you to write your thesis in a proper structure. You will find the weaknesses, flaws only when you start to write them, and when you start to read it again, you give it to your supervisor, you give it to the expert people which you think might help me to understand my mistakes. Okay, so allow approximately 30% of your time for writing, so that is very important. So the 70% of the time you are already allocating for your research work. It's not only about you. You also need to think of the reader who is going to read your thesis and who is going to mark your thesis, who is going to assess your thesis. So it's never only you. There is always the reader at the other end. So, thinking of the reader is important aspect when you are writing your thesis. So, do not make unreasonable assumptions about your audience. You don't know to whom your thesis is going to get. Alright, so make sure that you understand that reader, to understand their mentality and deliver your writing or your skill in such a way that your reader will be pleased or will be happy to read your thesis. Examiners hate to be made to work hard. Okay, so your job is to make their job easy. to understand poorly named sections, organize ideas themselves from your work and vet to the bad grammar. So improper sentences, improper structures, poor grammar, all these tiny things can hamper the reader's mentality, and then he might get frustrated or will not be in a state to read your thesis anymore. So it's your responsibility, it's your duty to make sure that your thesis is foolproof. So what are the examiners are looking for? So when it goes to the other end, in the hands of the examiner, what they are looking for is, first thing is the presentation of your results. That includes whether the hypothesis has been clearly described. Are the results shown are supporting the hypothesis that you have proposed in your aims and objectives section? Is the data properly analyzed? Are the results presented clearly? Are patterns identified and summarized? So these are some important criteria or the aspects that examiners are looking to get the answers from your Bible. And they find it, yes, is being answered very well, then you are most likely to succeed in this criteria. The another part what they are looking for is the discussion and the conclusion. In the earlier part of this session, I also mentioned that your examiners will first look into the abstract and the conclusion. If they find they are flowing it in a very well manner, and if they find it satisfactory, you have won the battle 50% at that stage. Okay, so they are also looking for the limits of your research identified. Are the main points to emerge been identified? Are the links made to the literature? Is there theoretical development? Are the speculations been well designed or been well addressed? So all these aspects the examiners will look while going through your discussion as well as the conclusion section. So always be careful. As I said, you need to dedicate 60% of your research time in writing this section of your thesis. So at the end, it's all over. You have written all the components of your thesis, starting from the title page to the appendices to the references. Okay. So now you say it's all over. Okay. You have finished writing and you are ready to defend your thesis. Again, the defending is a different scenario where basically I would like to say you are the master of your research work. So you know what you have done. So there shouldn't be any issue while defending your thesis, okay? But only the defending has to go in a very theoretical way. So once you have done this, what's the next, okay? So there are many ways how you can take your research further. For example, I would suggest a lot of research students to participate into conferences, to present their work in the form of the posters, to present their work in the form of the literature or journal articles where they can publish it. So the wider amount or the wider scale of the researchers can have a look at the work that they have done. Even you can make copies of your thesis and you can distribute it to relevant institutes where that might give you an opportunity to work further in your field of interest. Okay, so that's how it needs to follow on. Once you have done your research project, it shouldn't end there. It's basically a starting point that how you can build on it by working more or creating the future prospect into your area. So you have finished writing and defending your thesis. What do you do next? Just think you will never have to do it again. All right. So this is the way I just try to explain these all different aspects of writing your thesis in a very precise manner, and I hope that you will build your skills on these aspects. You will look into each and every factors on each and every section of your thesis carefully. And there are few tips and tactics I have mentioned in this section, which I believe will help you to write your master's as well as your PhD thesis, which will prove to be a very strong output of your research work. So with that, I would like to conclude here, and I wish everyone who are listening to this session a very all the best. Thank you.